After just last evening and that massive cabinet or rather secretary level rejig being announced, Subash Chandra Garg was, remember, moved to the power ministry while it was Atanu Chakrabarti who is going to be taking over as the economic affairs secretary. And now news just in that Secy Garg, who was overseeing India's debut overseas bond sale, has decided to abruptly call it quits, and he is set to seek retirement after this abrupt transfer. Maithili Busner-Matt, consulting editor ET now as well, joining in on the show right now. Maithili, hi, good morning. I would say not quite abrupt because there was just 1 year left to go before his official retirement. And like, Ruchi was also pointing out that he was the senior most diplomat in the economics affairs ministry. And after this sudden change, which was announced last evening, it's but obvious that he would seek retirement.
Well, I'm not so sure it's obvious, but clearly he perceives it. And generally also, I think most observers would see it as a rather public rap on his knuckles, because he was holding managing very sensitive issues. As you mentioned, the sovereign bonds and relations with the Reserve Bank of India. He was a member of the Jalan Committee and is reported to have put in a dissent note. So I was also on the board of the Reserve Bank of India. So he was handling a number of very sensitive portfolios. So at this juncture, when the government is supposedly coming out with its sovereign bond issue in the month of October, which is not very far off, his abrupt shifting to the power ministry was clearly seen as something that was not very in good taste. And clearly he also perceived it like that, which is why he has apparently opted to put in his papers. But the optics certainly are not very good.
Just give us a little bit of context. Ruchi was referring to how he was very vocal, with regards to some of the moves that Viral Acharya was sort of trying to push through. Just give us a little bit of context in terms of really, perhaps. Where perhaps there could have been a difference of thought, and why this move was perhaps put into place.
Well, I think Mr. Garg was only upholding the government's position, whether it isn't the issue of Viral Acharya, who actually did make a very upfront and rather, aggressive attack on the government's position. So I think Garg was only doing what any good bureaucrat would have done in his position. But perhaps one can only surmise, one doesn't know. Perhaps the government perception within government circles was that maybe he need not have been, so blunt about it, even whenever he had a disagreement with the Reserve Bank of India. Could it have been handled better? Because governments usually don't like disagreements between various wings. And here I'm looking at the Reserve Bank as a wing of the government, even though technically it is not. So maybe there was this view that he could have been a little bit diplomatic. I'm not so sure about it, because it's a question of each person's style. And let's also not forget that Garg has been in the finance ministry for a very, very long time. So if there were times when he felt the need to put the government's position across very clearly and perhaps a little bluntly, I'm not sure that should be held against him. But coming at this juncture, when you have just about 6 months to go before the government presents the first full budget in his second tenure, it certainly will be a loss to the finance ministry, because as I said, he's really been a man for all seasons for this government.
So what then explains this rejig? I mean, why would he, Maithili, in the first place, be replaced and moved to the power ministry?
Well, to be very honest, the power ministry also needs a very capable secretary, because there's a big mess in the power sector. But it's clearly perceived as being brought down in the hierarchy, because the finance secretary is perceived, and I say again, perceived as being a little higher in the hierarchy. Possibly, and here, as I said, one is only it's only a perception, one is surmising, one will never know the inside story. But perhaps the government felt he could have handled these issues wherever there was friction between the government and the Reserve Bank of India, the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank of India. Maybe the government felt it could have been handled more diplomatically. One must remember that one also has a bureaucrat now, ex-bureaucrat rather, in the Reserve Bank of India. So perhaps there is this view that maybe one should not have too much of clash. One doesn't know. But as I said, this is all just surmising, intelligent, quote-unquote, intelligent guessing.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But thanks very much, Maithili, for joining in with what you made of the latest developments. Early retirement it is for Secy Garg.